Hi there and welcome to the latest episode of the Kids Media Club podcast. I'm Andy Williams.
Hi, welcome along. I'm Jo Redfern, and before I hand over to Emily to introduce today's guest, I'm just going to give a shout out to our new TikTok channel. Yay! The Kids Media Club is now on TikTok, so if you search kids_media_club, you will find us there. In fact, you'll see my big moon face in one of the videos. I'm slightly too close to the camera. Anyway, aside from that, what we're going to be doing is posting clips from the show and each episode on there. And we're also going to be sharing and reposting things that we think are relevant to kids media and also trending videos, and maybe the odd thing that's made us laugh in the in the past week or so. So do look us up on TikTok and follow. Okay, over to Emily to introduce today's illustrious guest.
Yeah, thanks, Jo. I'm so excited about the TikTok channel. But I'm also super excited about our guest today, who is Eric Calderon of Falcons Beyond. Eric, you're super welcome to join us.
Oh, thanks for having me. I've just got to say I'm a huge fan. I listen to you guys in my car, in my earphones, and I feel like you're a very rare source of really expert information, but like really delivered in a casual, fun way. So I feel like I'm around a water cooler with you guys.
Oh, thank you so much, Eric. Great. That's great. We do know some stuff about stuff, but you know lots of stuff about other stuff. So that is one of the reasons we have invited you on to talk a little bit about anime. Anime is something we covered on the podcast. I would say it's probably over a year ago, and it's something we've been discussing recently that we really wanted to jump in on and kind of re-engage with. So you are such a knowledgeable person on anime. We wanted to have you on to chat about it.
Thank you.
So like I always like to go back to basics with anime. As I was saying before we started recording, I am an anime amateur. I am definitely in my learning era on the genre. We're seeing more and more data to say that it's becoming very key and a very strategic building content segment or media segment for streaming and beyond, even licensing, merchandising, and theatrical, like just the potential of
too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, like in terms of how have you seen the evolution of anime coming in? Because you've been on the journey the whole way. You're not just kind of like, it's not just pinging your radar like it is for me.
Yeah. Well, I guess let me start by saying, my full-time job is executive vice president of creative development at Falcons Beyond. So, Falcons Beyond is like, we've done theme parks for like 25 years coming next year. But over the past like 3 or 4 years, we've been doing a lot of IP expansion, a lot of media development. So that's why they brought more traditional media development executive like myself on board. But, because we're doing the Dragon Ball theme park, which is, 500,000 square meter gigantic operation, we founded the company that, anime is deeply, deeply center to a lot of what we're doing. And then personally, I've, been in the industry now about 30 years, and I spent a good significant amount of time in Japan. I was one of the early producers there, 2000, 2001, straight up until 2008, working for a company called Studio Gonzo. And then for an additional 7, 8, 10 years, I was still working with Japanese talent. And now I'm kind of back again, working with them as one of the team members working on the Dragon Ball theme park. So, just to set the stage properly. Now, I think to begin, anime is one of those things where it's starting to feel very much like in the 90s when you say hip hop. When people say anime, it's kind of like, well, of course it's everywhere. Of course it's part of this, part of that. And people who are into it have a natural sense, a natural taste to kind of know what's happening in training. But if you're just not into it, it's not your thing. It can seem very foreign. And I remember in the 90s when people were talking about hip hop, and there was like this line of people were just like, I don't get it. I'm never going to get it. It all sounds the same to me. But now you come to the where we are in 2024, and there are decades, literally decades of fans going back, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And so there's all these different parts, and there's no way to kind of put a monolith around the whole thing. So I always kind of remind people, when you're talking about anime, it's a gigantic collection of a subset of other genres. That's the first thing.
Yeah. In terms of these kind of epochs that you're referring to, for the uninitiated, of which I count myself one, how would you categorize them broadly?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to say is, let's use some casual terms to kind of make it easy. The kind of the old heads of anime, let's call it, and that's, I would roughly say like 50s to 80s. That's kind of a large tranche of time where anime was being made a lot. Post World War II, manga was the first form of mass media in Japan. And when they were adapting things, anime became a natural extension of their current skill set. So, there's anime production studios that have been around since like the 50s and 60s. But 50s through 80s, distribution worldwide was very piecemeal. It was mostly through traditional linear broadcasters filling time with cheap programming. Someone like myself in the 70s was getting, Kimba the White Lion and Speed Racer and, Battleship Yamato in these little blocks where basically news stations didn't want to put any programming. So it'd be like Thanksgiving, Christmas.
Right.
It would just be full of all this anime because it was really cheap to buy. It was dubbed hilariously and either by Australian actors or, kind of just whoever. But there's some gems of like amazing 70s
like
kung fu
anime
movie style.
I remember looking at it, and anime like really supported the bootleg dubbing, like the phenomenon of bootleg dubbing. When like anime was a really big part of that, and still remains so.
Yeah, and in the 70s and 80s, there was a famous radio host on national broadcast named Casey Kasem. And Casey Kasem was literally like in Scooby Doo, but he was also like Speed Racer.
Yeah.
So a lot of those like half a dozen actors did everything back then. So then I would say like the 90s to the early 2000s, I would say in the broadest sense, that's the Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, first children's massive influx of Japanese anime. Probably started with maybe Sailor Moon up through Digimon, Pokemon. And that's when you really saw bigger brands, bigger companies coming in and leveraging the power of cheap to produce massive quantities of content that supported something like a game or a card game or a video game. And that's when you got like your 4Kids blocks and you really started to see this massive penetration, right? So then going like 2000 to 2000, I would say 10, it's the BitTorrent, the influx. And that's when really file sharing and internet, mostly illegal, really just made the whole thing this massive, wider industry. And that's when the people who maybe only saw Akira or Ghost in the Shell in some art theater near their college were now able to get files day and date to release in Japan. And you really saw this massive surge of fan interest and the genre of what was watchable expanded. And at the same time, at least in the US, we had Toonami. So Toonami was the Cartoon Network block, very cheap acquisition. Legend has it that Dragon Ball was originally sold to Cartoon Network for something like $500 an episode.
Wow.
But Funimation was laughing because they were selling DVDs and VHSs that they just could not keep on the shelves.
Yeah.
And then, eventually Cartoon Network got smart and they're like, wait a minute, why don't we pay you $0, but you give us a percentage of the DVD? And then you saw really that Toonami and Adult Swim started to really get, And then I would say 2012 to now, I think we'll call it the modern era of anime. And now we're on multiple streaming services. We are having companies like Netflix and Hulu, not so much Disney and Crunchyroll, come into the Japanese system at really a finance and, investment level and starting to get into these very protected production committees and starting to put their name on it. And now suddenly the back and forth and East meets West and all the genres, it's filled and filled and filled and filled. And I would like to say, we've had a massive cultural turning point, probably about 2014, 2015. I like to call it like the Naruto tectonic plate,
Yeah.
Which is like, if you're of a certain age, you've seen every single episode of Naruto and you just can recite it all. But if you're above that, you just have never heard of it.
Yeah.
And then, I really think about it like this, this like Paleozoic period and, it's just the plate line. And above that, people are so saturated that it's now common culture to them.
Yeah. It's not... Sorry, go.
Sorry, I just wanted to pick up on your comparison with rap music and hip hop. And I think hip hop really developed its kind of fan base and initially from fans on the ground sharing music that they loved and swapping kind of tracks that they thought was fantastic. And I wonder do you think that parallels with how anime's grown in popularity? Do you think?
Oh, 1,000%.
Fan driven phenomenon.
I think you're really correct to point that comparison. So anecdotally, I bought my first anime in 1986 in a Star Trek convention in Pittsburgh. It was a Betamax copy of Akira. And it was in Japanese. I didn't understand anything. And my friends and I just saw one of those little mini TVs that had like the TV and the thing built in. And we were like, what is that? And we just had to buy it. And we all went home and watched it. And we all were fully asleep 20 minutes in because there was no subtitle Jap. But we just wake up when there are explosions. And, and I've had that copy probably for 30 years. But I think, VHS sharing Betamaxes and stuff at conventions, that was really the first wave. And there's an incredible movie called, I'm going to forget the name, but it's an anime about people who make anime. But there are these live interviews in between, and it was done in like the midnight. In these live interviews, there's a Japanese dubber who's got a stack of VHSs, and during the interview, he's popping things on and just pressing record because they're all getting mailed overseas. And this was like
and it's that piece of like I think that piracy piece. It's really intertwined with the fan-driven piece because the fans really felt like they owned the genre or owned not necessarily the industry. And then the other thing I find really interesting is that like with kids media, it has been the approach has been get the money to make the show and the license and merchant the L&M will follow. Whereas with anime, was like find a way to produce the film. Whether like it wouldn't be a kind of maybe like a global broadcasting deal like we would have had with kids media, and we will get the licensing and merchandising to then make the second and all that kind of stuff. It's a little bit it kind of flows the opposite direction, which is kind of fascinating because I feel like in kids media we're now becoming to a crux where it's like those global deals are kind of disintegrating in front of everybody's eyes. So looking to anime for the models that they've had.
It's also worth kind of taking a quick sidebar to talk about how most anime is actually financed and put together. They have this thing called the production committee structure. So the production committee structure is basically like there's successful manga, there's successful property, and kind of like a few agents who represent that company, whether it's the publisher themselves or independent producer, says, let's make up a manga called Running Guy. So Running Guy is successful. There's the Running Guy production committee formed. And then these producers go out and they start to look for licenses and pre-sales and investors, and they put together the pot of what is the total budget of the film. But all of that stuff is kind of pre-negotiated out, right? That budget is then given to the production company. The production company begins production. They just start, right? And they're just taking page 1, adapting, page 2, adapting, page 3, adapting. Now, as the anime is done, all of those licensees then look for the timing of the release, and they start to put out the products and services that they pre-arranged to do, right? And there's an advertising agency in the middle that you sell the finished product to, which then puts it on a channel and then pre-buys the advertising for that channel. So it's just kind of a fully self-enclosed system that's decentralized. As you see, there's no notes, there's no executives, there's no brand management. It is purely manga is
no brand management. What?
It's what?
That's amazing.
Yeah,
that's amazing. I just wanted to kind of quickly do another sidebar on that. I'm going to do the real Ladybird ABC thing here, which is that I don't know if we've said that manga is obviously the comic version,
right?
And then anime's the animated version.
I apologize. Yeah, that's right.
No, but that it's me kind of wanting to really drill it down to the absolute Ladybird nursery book version of this.
It's in a way. Sorry, Andy. Sorry, I didn't realize.
No, I was just going to say that, and it's amazing to see how manga effectively is the pilot often for these stories and these characters. I mean, it's a intellectual property ecosystem that sounds amazing.
Well, isn't it interesting saying, where it almost makes that way of doing business look very, very prescient, because now we're all talking about how brand management has changed in the last 20 years. Of course, we're talking about how brand management of very Western kind of brands has changed from that command and control top-down way of managing brands, where the IP owner dictated the rules of engagement and how something was going to happen and when it was going to happen in a market. And now, in the world of our attention economy in which we all survive, and, you know, those tools of creation and sharing have been democratized and all the kids have got means of access and studios in their pocket. Now we talk about brand management from the ground up, distributed, decentralized, to use a word that you said, Eric. And there we have, you know, anime being produced that way 20 years ago.
Yeah, and it's a little, you know, the nuance starts to get more interesting when you look at like a case study. So if you look at Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Yu-Gi-Oh, when it started as a manga, was, you know, just another run. It was a successful creator. They gave him a shot. But Yu-Gi-Oh started off as an all-game master. And for the first few manga, it just wasn't really hitting anyone. But the editors, who are really the genius development executives of the real sourcing of new ideas in Japan, they, you know, pre-internet or very early internet, were starting to ask questions, talk to fans, get engaged, realized the fans were confused, realized that it wasn't hitting, went back to the author and said, you know, it's got to be one game. It can't be like Master of all games. So they literally invented a card game to put in the comic, and you just saw the sales go bip, and just one issue, and it went up. But that was a very interactive process. You know, I think they were pulling fan insight. They were then negotiating with the creator, you know, because the creator could essentially do what they want to because of their deal. Right. And, you know, they came to an agreement. It was masterful.
Many years ago, in the early 2000s, I worked for a DVD licensee, the one that had the Yu-Gi-Oh license for the UK. Contender Entertainment Group, as was before E1 bought it to get its hands on Peppa Pig. But we used to do the Yu-Gi-Oh DVDs, and we used to have to go and buy the cards to put in the DVDs, because there was no way they would sell without the cards. But each time we went out every Christmas in Woolworths with our Yu-Gi-Oh DVDs with the cards in, boy, they shifted some units.
That's amazing. Amazing. Wow.
Loved it.
So who's doing well at anime these days, Eric? When we're thinking streaming, you know, as I said, I think that the pirated element of anime, I think, remains part of the culture of anime, honestly. But we are seeing streamers get more into the game. We have Crunchyroll, obviously, dedicated streamer. I would often hold it up as a great example of a niche streamer that's doing, you know, that's found a great vibe and is doing a genre and is doing things well. But, you know, more and more we're hearing that other streamers are investing in anime. But like, who's doing it well? Who's doing it well? Who's faking?
Well, it's an interesting question, because I think there's a couple of winners. There's a couple of, I would say, quiet winners, and there are a couple of, I would think, super fanboys who are kind of burning gas right now. So I think the real winners is Crunchyroll is the first big winner, and the reason is because they were there as early as 2007. You know, I met with Kun Gao when he first launched the company, and he had this crazy idea of making anime streaming legal. We all laughed at him, and we said it was impossible. But he really, you know, him and his cohorts really negotiated a deal where they were doing day and date releases. Mm-hmm. And I think the cost that they're able to get things, the impact they're able to have, and then, you know, finally being purchased by Sony and having the infrastructure, and also having the bones of Funimation, which is really the fan engagement, marketing, license, and merchandise wing. They have a really nice ecosystem, and they're a right-sized company. You know, they have probably 14, maybe 17 million paid subscribers, but they get close to 100, and AVOD, you know, free subscribers with advertising, and most of, if not all of their stuff is acquired. And, you know, I think that's a really cost-effective, lean and mean company. And so I think they're a real winner. I think Netflix is also a big winner. I mean, I think they just basically powered their way into the Japanese market. They have sometimes majority share in the very coveted production committee position, which production committees are not super excited about, because they don't provide any additional revenue to the production committee source. They just buy once and then nothing else comes. So if you're the production committee for Yu-Gi-Oh, or do you take the Netflix money now, or do you do the traditional route and get money for 5, 10, 7, you know? But I think, you know, compared to the cost of live action, it's, you know, orders of magnitude smaller. for them to come in on a small co-pro. Now, I think where they are maybe burning gas a little bit and also not a great winner is in some of these. I kind of have my own definitions of different types of anime. There's like traditional anime, but there's what I call cowboy anime. So cowboy anime is basically any Japanese inspired animation where the creative center is not Japan. So that's like Castlevania, right. That's like Dragon Prince, that's like Avatar: The Last Airbender. I think that a lot of those efforts are happening right now. They're way more expensive and there's no success yet in license and merchandise, lifestyle, etc. So those are good shows. They just happen to be more expensive and they have less fan engagement long term, right? And then there's the California roll. So I think the California roll is when American brands or Western brands try to do anime with their properties. So that's Terminator, that's Blade Runner. There's a couple of those, and I'm a super opinionated fan. I feel generally they've all been very below expectation of the original brand's version. I mean, comparing Blade Runner to Blade Runner Black Lotus, it's just not even close. And looking at Terminator and Terminator Zero, it's really just copy paste of what we've already seen. Now,
go into that a bit more, though. Go into that a bit more, Eric, because you've watched them, and like what, like you feel like they're not embracing the medium enough. It's not like is it basic stuff like pacing? Is it the visual? Like
or a sense of exceptionalism?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I think in the case of Blade Runner, Black Lotus, and Terminator Zero, these are very tired franchises.
Yeah.
They're franchises that have been adapted. And when you bring something to Japan, unless you come A, with a really unique vision, or B, they have a unique vision, they just do a lot of rinse and repeat.
Okay.
I'm actually one of the producers of the never released Alien versus Predator anime that was actually commissioned by Fox and Fox Home Video in Japan. We did 10 episodes. It's done. It's in the can. And Fox buried it, never released it. But I will tell you very honestly that the director basically wanted to copy every scene from Aliens, the movie. So we had our not Ripley strong female lead in a power loader. We had a young girl who was being protected by a maternal figure who was kind of then coded into like a cute teenage girl. Like it just felt like very, we had a group of military guys who were all like trying to beat the aliens. And then we had a big mother fight the main, there's just nothing new there, right? On the other side, Cyberpunk Edge Runners is amazing. It's so good. And I think the secret sauce was that the CD Projekt Red, who creates, The Witcher and Cyberpunk, really found a kindred spirit in this guy named Director Imaishi, a real visionary, unique guy. And I think when they really had this kind of jazz band practice and they're kind of like, oh, this is sounding really good. They just let him go. And that is a uniquely original show that had a really soulful connection to the original brand, but was a true talent on top of that.
That's very often the difference, isn't it? You've got to be brave, grasp the nettle, and then let that person run with it. And that's when the magic happens. So very difficult often for producers and networks to do.
Yeah, there's got to be a lot of courage. You're correct. Like if you saw the Scott Pilgrim adaptation into really probably, I think, the best version of cowboy anime that I've seen, because it was Science Saru, who's this really unique kind of Looney Tunes company. There's also like the original author, right? And he was like, there was a story I wanted to tell that was not in the live action movie it was brilliant because Scott Pilgrim is not interesting. What's interesting is Ramona, who's got 7 ex-boyfriends. Like that's the story we want to see. And when you go into Ramona's story, you're like, Scott Pilgrim's so boring. Just boyfriend.
Yeah, and the original comics, in a way, they have parallels with manga as well. So it kind of made complete sense to kind of return it to that.
And you're talking about hip hop. That's the mix right there of the guy who was an American influenced by Japan, who came back and did American stuff. And those are, I think, the real masters who are going to change the genre and change the art form are going to be the ones who have kind of really properly tasted the culture and then can do the remix that is authentic to both sets of fans.
And how do you think the anime industry, my sense is that now there's kind of a real demand for a lot of anime series, and maybe the challenge is to be able to meet that demand. How do you think the industry is going to address that challenge in the years to come?
Yeah, you're 100% correct. The capacity of Japan has been, crushingly difficult for anyone with a pencil and with actual talent who lives in Japan. They're oversaturated. There was a big China wave where like all these Chinese producers were basically taking up capacity and, just commissioning. So all these shows with Chinese distribution were filling all the available pipeline. And then Netflix, quite brilliantly, there was a leader there named Taito Okura, who I work with on Afro Samurai. He was head of Netflix Japan, and he smartly said, forget development, forget like concepts. I'm going to buy production capacity. So he negotiated 2-3 years of capacity per studio. I mean, that's like Game of Thrones good.
Mm.
And then he figured out what to make them animate, but he reserved them.
Amazing.
Yeah. But I think they're having trouble. They're having trouble with talent. They're having trouble keeping people in the industry. They're having trouble paying them because a lot of them are going to games as well. Yeah. And the craft of 2D animation is now, getting sourced out worldwide. So there's a lot of world talent now and they're discovering them on YouTube. They're discovering, on art channels, and then they're starting to get the proper translation and sourcing worldwide talent to help them with production.
And I just delving into those kind of subgenres within anime, just talk us through what you kind of see as those different styles, if you like. Again, for the uninitiated,
Sure.
What are the main styles?
So if you think about anime and you also think about manga, you have to remember that like more than 50% of all entertainment in Japan is illustrated or drawn. So they have much more illustrated entertainment than live action entertainment, right? So when you go into these bookstores, it's almost like our traditional library in Western countries is divided in the bookstore by genre, and like probably by far, I think the biggest, most successful genre is called shonen. So shonen is this, the reductive way is boys action, right? But the more complex definition is I am in the mood to watch an adventure that follows the trope that is typically associated with a young boy, right? And to go a little deeper into that, it involves physical training, where I increase the muscle mass or physical capacity of my body. It involves an ironic opposite theme that makes me unlikely to succeed at getting physically stronger. It requires a stated verbal goal said aloud like a million times over and over again. And it is all under a theme that is kind of a beautiful discussion that we can kind of carry with us for the rest of your life. Is it friendship? Is it save the planet? Is it, so, whether they know it or not, shonen fans kind of are expecting this to happen when they go through it, or it's like it doesn't really fit, right? So that's shonen. I would say like probably the next biggest one in Japan, but I think more and more outward, you might pitch to Joe, is sports. Sports manga is a huge genre, to the point where one of the most successful shows, Slam Dunk, which is a boys' high school basketball franchise, literally increased the amount of kids playing basketball in Japan. Like when that manga came out, you saw an actual increase of kids wanting to play basketball, get into basketball, watch live basketball, because Slam Dunk is a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
As you slip more to the other ones, you get into shoujo, which is the opposite of shonen. It's young girls comics. That's typically your romances, but shoujo is going to be like under 15, under 14. And then, shonen and shoujo have their grown-up versions. So shonen has seinen, which I love is defined as university and working men manga. And then josei, which it's not really nice that they say it this way, but they call it office lady manga. So o-edu or ol means for office ladies. And then you get into some of the other more subgenres. Boys love is going to be your LGBTQ manga. There's a lot of like cute boy romance and stuff. There's straight comedy manga. There's adventure manga. And then there's the one I really find is not talked about enough is Gekiga. Gekiga is the dramatic picture, cinematic movie-like manga. So, Pluto, which recently came out, is under that category. Gogol 13 is like almost like a classic James Bond spy movie. So this is a very like sophisticated older cinephile, who wants to like get this movie-like experience in a comic that's Gekiga. So all that then transfers over to anime. Those genres are the same from manga into Japanese anime as well.
Yeah. I was thinking, so you run the Surviving Animation podcast on YouTube with the iconic mugs that are doing the rounds on LinkedIn. Oh, nice one, Joe.
We have like 6 left, so
Product placement.
they're not collector's items. Yeah.
But something you spoke about recently, which is part of how we were chatting, was this development within shonen anime to like that it's becoming more and more violent. We were kind of exchanging on this, and you did a video on this recently. So like, take us through the key thoughts about that.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated because I think when you think about young boys action, especially as Western producers, we have a certain association. We think about the Marvel Universe, we think about, Lucas, we think about, what's a safe environment to tell certain action stories, but sell a lot of merchandise. We just have kind of our intuition. Where shonen is becoming basically like teen horror right now in Japan. Demon fighting and decapitations and zombie films and all this stuff. And it's not the same, I think, as it was 15, 20, 30 years ago, where Dragon Ball and Naruto were these cute, happy, fun-loving, crazy kids. But now as you get into like the later versions, I think Naruto has a son now named Boruto.
Mm-hmm.
But, they've had some hardcore fistfights and they've all lost limbs and they beat the crap out of each other. I think Dragon Ball is that kind of stayed in a more stylized, super non-violent thing. But when you get to like, Chainsaw Man and Demon Slayer and Solo Leveling and Jujutsu Kaisen, I mean, the illustrations and the monster design here, it feels almost more like Clive Barker or, like some, really, really tough horror movie. I'm not sure why. I'm very curious to know why it's happening.
I wonder whether social media has a role in that. So one of the things I've kind of observed through my career, kind of in kids and family TV, is that when we started, it was quite a walled garden element to it. You'd have preschool, but then you'd kind of also have different categories as children would get older, and it almost feels like you now have under 7s, and then everything beyond that is more of a kind of an open question in terms of how old it's going to go or not. And I wonder whether social media plays a part in that, just because kids from quite an early age will have access to a kind of a large range of different material.
Yes, yeah. In the toilet.
And whether that also has an influence on anime, really, in terms of almost aging it up in more of an accelerated way than it used to be.
Yeah, I also take the other approach, which is if we go back to the hip hop example, manga and anime at its core is driven by authors and talent who make what they want to make. That's the big difference with Japan and most Western media. In Western media, we have to negotiate with dozens and dozens of people and companies to get something made, right? In Japan, they just start making. So if you think about it from that approach, they just might be in the mood for it, and, authors and they're just in a place right now that culture is telling them to do this. And maybe they weren't there in the 80s and they weren't there in the 90s. Yeah. But it's,
so
anxiety, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And maybe that again is another parallel to the way content creators work for YouTube and in a way that maybe it's always been more creator driven in anime.
It is 1,000,000% creator driven.
Yeah. But
interesting.
I think adding to that is because a lot of UGC platforms are algorithmically driven and algorithms reward extremes. Yeah. So it's, it might not be, the creators wish to take it one step further, but actually there will always be somebody else who is willing to game the algorithm. So actually then it does push it. So yeah, I mean, I look at, obviously I spend a huge amount of time on Roblox and see how those horror games have grown from just being kind of spooky, walking up and down corridors, opening doors. It's that kind of jump scare that we used to do with video DVDs with our friends when we were teenagers. But now, actually, you know, there's those, and then it advances into something slightly more gory. And to your point, Eric, there's decapitations and this, and then it just spreads and proliferates because it's almost, you almost have to push it one step further for the algorithms to pick you up and then push you up the discovery page. So I think, I think that for me certainly is a concern where we think about young people accessing it and this kind of idea of cognitive flattening or, you know, just becoming numb to it. A bit of a worry.
There is a question there though, like, and I'm not overly familiar with the animes that you're talking about, Eric, but it's like, when does it cross the line between like violence into theater, right? Like when is it just so gory that it's like it's not even realistic, or it's kind of it's crossed that line into full theatrical kind of vibe. Like I was thinking, and I said this to Eric, it was like Wednesday. So Wednesday on which was hugely successful on Netflix, definitely not it wasn't in the kids section on Netflix, not accessible to kids, was hugely popular. I feel like it was based in a high school. There was tons of stuff like that was so square on the mark for a kids audience, an older kids audience, obviously. But the finale of that was like, you know, blood on the rails. Like, I mean, it was just like, but it was, but you know, I don't know. And maybe I'm wrong to be even like making that distinction, but you know, sometimes there's times when it just like, I don't know. So I'm not sure if that's what you're seeing, or if it's genuine, like concerning violence that's very, you know, human and targeted and that kind of thing.
Well, I have a concern from, you know, a Western perspective, and also like as a parent and also as a producer, that a lot of what works in Japan is extremely problematic in the rest of the world. I mean, if you go back to early 2000s, there was a live action movie called Battle Royale, which was about a bunch of high school kids who had to like kill each other on an island because they're the worst of the worst of the worst. And the last one, you know, comes out. So that evolves into stuff like Squid Game, that evolves into stuff like, you know, Assassination Classroom, which is like literally the title of a new, you know, thing that's out right now.
Not a reality show.
Revengers. I mean, these are all stories of like high school kids who have to kill. Right.
Yeah.
And I've got a huge problems with that.
Yeah.
You know? But there's not the same kind of standards and practices in the manga and anime world to prevent that. Because I think they just have a different view of society. I wouldn't say it's wrong. I would say that in Japan, there's this idea of, and they talked about it in Shogun, actually, a little bit better than I'm about to explain now. But they have this two-face idea. So tatamaim is like the face that you show to society, which is, you know, I'm a husband, I'm a wife, I'm a producer, that's my job. I, you know, run the train. And on the inside is honne. Honne is like your true self, right? Now, honne is allowed to think whatever it wants because it will. Tatama is your social responsibility to not bring that out into the world and do terrible things. So Japanese like to say that manga and anime is honne. It has to be unrestricted and wild because that's allowed. So I can be a businessman on the train and be reading, you know, something pornographic or read horror or whatever, and everyone's like, oh, he's experimenting and his honne is thinking. But he's also in his seat. He's, you know, he's working a job. He's not bothering anyone, and he's going home to his family. So his tatama is intact. So for Japan, that's normal. And they say if your tatama and honne are the same, you're insane, right? And if your honne is pushing through into the world, you're a sociopath, right? Whereas in Western society, we tend to think thoughts are, you know, if you have bad thoughts, you might be a bad person. Yeah. Which is like, you know, which is a big difference. So that's why a lot of this media just can like be whatever it is. And Japanese are like, oh, that's cool, whatever. Juju Kaisen, he ate the finger of a demon and now he fights demons. And he's
maybe that also points to sometimes the challenge of having something that's been developed as a very specific culture in one country, then move to another country. Because, I mean, I'm hypothesizing here, but perhaps Western cultures don't have so much of a shared sense of public and personal responsibility to counterbalance the other side of that.
Correct.
We're getting up. We're going political. This is going. We're sociological. This is going off media, you guys.
Yeah.
They might be going, you know, canceling. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, let's bring it back to. I wanted to talk about. I mean, let's talk about the BBC. That's bringing it right back.
There we go.
The BBC, obviously, of course, One Piece turning up on the BBC. That's a big moment for anime into the BBC, right?
I didn't know that happened. When did One Piece start airing on the BBC?
It was only in the last couple of weeks. I think they've taken all 1,000 episodes. Am I right, Emily? I don't think they're all available yet, but they've certainly acquired them. And really, I mean, if that isn't a kind of proxy for how the cultural crossover has happened with anime, I don't know what is. But actually also, from the BBC's point of view, a real signal that it had a problem drawing young people, particularly to iPlayer. I mean, when I read that announcement, I was like, okay, this is squarely for the 10 to 14 audience. They've only taken the English dub, by the way.
Yep.
But
is it a British dub? I don't know. You don't have to answer that. So it's fine.
No. Well, I think that's a really good move for them because, One Piece is a breath of fresh air in the sense that it is adventure, it is comedy, it's fun. And, I'll give you one interesting, deep cut spoiler. But so Luffy is the main character in One Piece. It's this adventure pirate story. He's trying to go around the world to find kind of the magic One Piece, which is like the secret to everything. So he's a free roaming pilot. He wants to be king of the pirate. But as the series goes, he fights these villains and he achieves these new fighting forms, right? These new fighting forms are called gear. So there's Gear 2, Gear 3, Gear 4. And what just came out recently is his Gear 5 expansion. And he's like all kind of like white curly hair and he's got these yellow eyes and he's doing these crazy things. But it's literally called like the Looney Tunes power or the Tunes power because he unlocks the ability to make himself do whatever cartoony thing he imagined.
Amazing.
So the original creator of One Piece actually said, I love Tom and Jerry.
Yeah.
And he wanted to kind of find a cartoony, happy character. So when Luffy becomes Gear 5, he's like Bugs Bunny.
Oh, fun.
But
Amazing.
Interpreted into anime because if he wants to make a big boxing glove punch, he'll do that. And then if he wants to have spinning arms that just look like a fan, he'll do that. Or if he wants to, it's great. And I think it's a really fun, creative adventure shoujo manga or shonen manga that, kind of breaks a lot what we talked about. It's just a creator going whatever way you want it to go.
And it's super sweet. Like there's a real sweetness and positivity to it, which I think is, which kind of fits really well with the BBC.
So emotional. So pure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just to bring data into it because it's a problem I have to do. I thought there was a good article on Polygon earlier this year that said 42% of Gen Z watch anime weekly, then to 25% with millennials, 12% with Gen X, 3% of boomers. But that 42% of Gen Z is exactly why BBC are doing this.
Yeah.
Correct. And at one point, One Piece, and this is really old data, but around 2005, 2006, One Piece was selling something had sold 174 million copies.
Right.
And there was a stat that said basically it was outselling the Japan Times.
Wow.
So that's the order of magnitude how big the manga industry is in Japan compared to, and that's old data.
Yeah. It's it certainly seems. I mean, again, recently I read an announcement in the UK that the Insights family, which is a research agency that specializes in kind of kids and family insights, they'd been appointed by Crunchyroll also to look at that kind of those kids opportunities in kids and family. So it certainly does seem to be kind of looking for its opportunity to reach, certainly in the UK, those the kids and family audiences, those 10 to 14s. We know they've got a huge influence on family purchases. Again, back to the licensing and merch points. It's capable of selling through quite a lot of merch. And again, much like Emily has to mention data, I have to mention Roblox, or else weird things happen. And just looking at anime on
Media Club podcast bingo.
But
Joe mentioned Roblox.
Anime huge on Roblox and a really passionate fan base on there, both users and developers that are creating experiences from the heart. But interesting to see how now Toei has been licensing a new movie that they've got coming out next year called Hypergalactic into the platform, and asking fan developers what, how would you bring this to life on the platform? I think that's genius and a real kind of new way of marketing and a new way of creating.
I talked to Spaceport about it, because I just was curious. I was like, what you're doing is super smart. It's super interesting. And I think what they're doing is kind of a next generation fusion of marketing and licensing
100%.
in a real powerful way that allows fans to do the work for you. It's really smart.
It's so smart. I too talked to them, Eric. Yeah. It was like, why did nobody think of this before? And then, of course, you've got Kodansha with the Attack of the Titan. That's more of like a competition that they're running for a Roblox experience. So, super interesting how it has got such kind of fandom that actually there are these new ways of expressing it and on these new platforms emerging almost monthly. So, when you look to the future, given your huge amount of experience in anime and the genre, where do you think the next wave of success stories are going to come from?
Well, it's interesting. I've been thinking a lot about what should Western producers and Western content creators do about this. Like, that's because we can't really control Japan. It's going to always do what it's going to do. And it's really hard to crystal ball what's going to happen because it comes from creators, not from big macro trends, right? But in Western producers, I thought about a couple things. One is like, you better learn hip hop. If you're going to be in the game, if you're going to be talking to kids, you better know some of the basics of how this stuff works. So just putting in the hours of sitting down and watching, and there's a mountain of content, and it's impossible to keep up with. And I think of myself as like decently informed, but any producer in our company who's like under 35 is like, bro, you have no idea what's happening like this season, right?
Really? Where would be a good starting point, Eric, for that?
Well, that really depends on what you feel like watching. I would say for shonen, you probably want to hit the big three. That's going to be Naruto, Dragon Ball, and One Piece. I think if you want to go into some probably like last 5 to 7 year trend, I would probably hit My Hero Academia is a big one. Spy X Family had a really big hit for a while. I think that was interesting. If you want to see how dark and how rough things can get in this world, Jujutsu Kaisen and Attack on Titan are going to be your the darker ones, which have echoes of a series called Bleach, which was about 20 years ago. Kind of your typical Demon Hunter stuff. I mean, if you want to see the bleeding edge of where the extreme shonen content is going to go, I would check out Chainsaw Man or Devil Crybaby, I think is what it's called. Devilman Crybaby, which is also very that's not shonen, that's straight up adult. But I think, on the other side, I think, especially going younger, Dragon Ball just did a full reset with Daima, which just came out, which is really harkening back to its more youthful fun days. And I think, some of the deeper cuts, and that gets into my fan favorite stuff, is, Full Metal Alchemist, just a beautiful emotional ride. And then there's just tons of really high quality feature films, all genres, all stuff, just stuff that you can take the whole family to, or you can, as an adult, discerning filmmaker, find really satisfying stories. I'm a big fan of Tokyo Godfathers, which is a Christmas story about 3 homeless people who find a healthy baby on Christmas Day and decide to return it to its owner. Just a wacky turn of events, slice of life story. I like Wolf Children, which is the story of a girl who decides to date a boy who turns out to be a werewolf. But he passes away and she has to raise these 2 kids on her own. And so she moves out to a farm outside of Tokyo so they don't get revealed. And it becomes a movie about farming.
And would that have started as a manga, or was that just an original movie?
I think that's a manga first. I remember it's a manga first. Yeah.
Because one of the things I really like about that, the development process of a manga, is you can have quite a way out idea, and if all you need to do is produce a comic, the costs are going to be limited.
Which we haven't talked about. The elephant in the room. It's not even manga anymore. It's webtoons.
Yeah, I was going to say,
webtoons is really probably the most vibrant platform for new content creation, and that's where I think if you're going to talk about any trend, it's probably the Korean manga or manhwa adapting into Japanese anime or live action TV. I think that's a really healthy development cycle right now.
And do we have the equivalent of American or Western companies also striking out and having real popularity with a webtoon comic, or is that kind of something that's more kind of?
I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen it yet. You know, I mean, if you look at like Lore Olympus, which is Webtoon's #1 webtoon book, I mean, it's got like 4.7 billion views. It's ridiculous, but it hasn't been adapted yet. And then I think when I think about the Western model of trying to get that kind of like long adventure shonen structure, our system is too bloated to pull it off. You know, I mean, you look at an amazing show like Dragon Prince, which is top notch. I mean, it's written by the guys who did Avatar: The Last Airbender. If you get into that show, it is some of the highest quality teen storytelling that I've seen. It is not working. You know, I mean, the algorithm of Netflix keeps triggering another season, and they have a video game that's coming out at the same time, and it looks like it's got all the bones of a great franchise, but no one's, I don't know why it's not moving the needle, but I feel like they're using animation as a way to launch IP, which is just way too expensive. You know,
and I wonder whether, I mean, looking at that, when you were saying about moving the needle, maybe part of the benefit of doing something in a smaller form like a manga or a webtoon is that you can build a fan base kind of iteratively. You can build it kind of gradually.
Yeah,
and so by the time it does transfer to animation, you've got enough of a fan base to almost have a bit of a critical mass to be able to nudge that algorithm needle.
And I think the production committees in Japan are just like these, I just see them as like these wizened old villagers who are just like, this one will work. And they just have like, they just like throw the bones on the ground. They kind of know just from like pure experience, you know.
And you talked about
development in Japan is hilarious because it doesn't exist. You know,
that's amazing. I mean, you talked as well about the Looney Tunes thing in One Piece.
Yeah.
And that's an example of how, in some ways, manga and anime did have some American influence originally. That was kind of one of the things that had inspired it. Does that kind of work now? Do you still think there's an American influence on anime and manga even now?
Yeah, 100%. I think the best example of that is going to be spacing out. It's the most obvious one I mentioned. It's My Hero Academia. My Hero Academia is a high school of Western superheroes. You know,
interesting.
And you know, the Superman is a character named All Might. And All Might is kind of at the end of his days, so he passes his ability to a young boy in this world. He's one of the rare kids who does not have a superpower. You know, so that is purely based on the creator's love of Western superheroes. And, you know, and there's another one with a terrible name that's really good called Tiger and Bunny. It's a terrible name. But it is an old news cop story where every superhero is sponsored by companies. So all these superheroes were all these logos, right? So there's this fading superhero. He's only got one logo on his center. He's got this old like 60s Batman outfit, you know?
Yeah.
And this marketing company is like, we think you're good. We're going to bring you back. And he's like, why me? He's like, because we found this young kid who's got the same powers as you.
Amazing.
And so they put both of them in this like super fancy body armor and they covered them with logos. And they're like, you're going to be Tiger and Bunny. And actual Japanese companies were sponsoring them in the cartoon. And
I love it.
It's such a great show. And every time that there's like a crime, they all rush, and all these news reporters are like, "Oh, it looks like All Might was, or it looks like Tiger was here first, 10 points. Oh, but it looks like he got the first hit in, 20 points." And so they have a yearly contest of who's like the best superhero. And the
amazing. I love the blatant. Yeah, I love the blatant transparency of the fact that it's going to have some advertising brands in there, and we're just going to make a virtue of it.
But what a terrible name! Who's going to watch Tiger and Bunny? You know, it's like preschool show
now.
I am. You are. But see, I mean, it's great. We kind of did it. This is how anime works. Like someone has the passion and they love it so much, they tell someone else, and then they're like, "I want to go watch it." That doesn't happen as much in Western media. There's just not the same. I don't know why. But we're not referring it to each other with the excitement and nerdiness that I just did.
I love that. I mean,
I'm an animated anime fan.
there very briefly, there's the original Gladiator script. All of the gladiators were going to be sponsored by the brands of that time, and supposedly that was historically accurate. And Russell Crowe said, "You can't put that in the script. It's really naff." It reminded me of is it Tiger and Bunny?
Yeah,
Tiger and Bunny
was also the original name for Gladiator, Tiger and Bunny.
Yeah, they didn't really get it for that either. Amazing.
Really, I mean, I would say like this could go on forever, like because it's been so great talking to you, Eric, and it's like,
sorry, I talk too much.
No, you definitely do not. This has been an absolute pleasure having you on. So we probably need to wrap it up. Apart from the fact that my computer's we've juiced my entire computer.
Oh, sorry.
Do you want to do a sign off, Andy?
Yeah, I'll do a sign off.
Yeah.
So thanks very much for being a guest, Eric, and thanks very much for you guys for listening. There's tons of anime recommendations for everyone to check out after this show. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you at the next one. Thanks.